Hello, welcome to my new series, African Reads, where I give you a review of African Reads and bring in an indigenous African perspective to themes and characters, events in African books. So today, I will be reviewing this book, The Seed Thief by Jacqui L'Ange. Not sure how you say her name. The story follows the main character, whose name is Maddy. She's a botanist. She works at the Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens in Cape Town, South Africa. The book follows Maddy's search for a seed of this tree species known as Newboldia mundi. So the first thing I will say about that is that actually this tree does not exist. Newboldia levis exists and actually has medicinal properties, but in the book both of these two species are presented as sister species, both of them from the African continent and specifically from West Africa. Now, as you know, West Africa and Brazil, as well as South America and the islands of the Caribbean, have a long, deep history of connection, both cultural as well as botanical, geological. The continent of South America kind of lines up with the continent of Africa, and so there's similarity of species, of plants, of animals sometimes, but then also with the cultural mixing that came about as a result of the trade in enslaved Africans. A lot of seeds were carried over, a lot of plants as well as animals were carried over from the continent of Africa, and specifically West Africa as well as Central West Africa, to South America, to Brazil, to the Caribbean. And so this plant that Maddy is looking for, Newboldia mundi, is said to be one of these. Although she's not sure, no one can truly be sure, but they're going in search of this. So there's a lot of intrigue, adventure, the threat of biopiracy, which in short is the stealing of plant genetic material from mostly indigenous communities for the benefit of profit, for the benefit of pharmaceutical companies, for example. And so within the book, pharmaceutical companies come through in the form of a company called Seedco that is also in search of this plant, this seed, Newboldia mundi. Seedco is also funding Maddy's journey unbeknownst to her, and her boss only lets her know this after she's arrived in Brazil, after she's arrived in Salvador da Bahia, which is known as the most African space outside of Africa, or rather it's a very African city, a very African state. The majority of enslaved Africans who were taken from the continent were taken to Salvador da Bahia as one of their first stops, and then from there will possibly be taken to other parts of the country. Some of my comments about the book and about the plot: I'm not a fan of the trope of a white woman falling in love with an Afro-Brazilian, finding her love fantasy kind of stereotype in Salvador da Bahia. But this book, The Seed Thief, is definitely a book that weaves a story around some very particular and serious issues. Who owns seed? Who controls seed? Who controls the knowledge that also is around the use, the propagation, the benefits that we get from plant material? And these issues have been more and more in the news, with the practice of pharmaceutical companies combing through the Congo forest, for example, combing through the indigenous knowledges of Khoi and San peoples of Southern Africa, who are known to still use a wide array of medicinal plants and herbs. I will say though that the use of indigenous plants and herbs, sacred plants, medicinal plants, plants for nourishment. All of this was way more common than it probably is now in the continent of Africa. With modernization, globalization, the rise of pharmaceuticals, this knowledge as well as the respect for the people who hold this knowledge has been in decline. Some recent aspects that have been in the news, for example, have been hoodia, a plant that regulates or diminishes your appetite, and this has been used in Southern Africa by San and Khoi communities who travel long distances and sometimes do not have immediate access to food or to water. So when they use the plant hoodia, it diminishes their appetite, and so they can go for longer periods of time without eating. But this has been taken up by pharmaceutical companies as a wonder drug to help people with weight loss. As you can see, the purposes are completely different. One purpose is to give life, to sustain life, and another purpose is to play into this fear and this diminishment of the beauty of people, mostly women, by companies seeking to make a profit. So on one hand, sustaining life, on the other hand, making a profit out of making people feel insecure and diminishing how people feel about themselves and their bodies. Next, I'll talk a bit about, well, what is seed in Africa, since, you know, this book, The Seed Thief, is very particularly around seed. So not even, you know, the stealing of any other parts of the plant, but in particular seed. Maddy is out to find the seed of this plant, not the leaves, not the roots, not the bark, not the whatever, seed. So what is seed in indigenous African lifeways? And from this, I'm drawing on what I've learned from working with indigenous communities, and this in particular, the women from the Tharaka community in what is now central Kenya. Seed is the beginning of life, the source of life. It's also the pathway to blessings within this indigenous community, and I know that this is replicated across other communities, across other cultures within the continent of Africa as well as outside of the continent. Seed is the arena, if you will, of women, the people who custodian seed are all women. And this to me is the link. You know, we talk about how within indigenous African communities, the way that communities are designed, the way that people living together, how we live together is designed is fractal. And if you don't know what fractal means, I will talk about it possibly in another video. But the way that we design life is fractal. So there's all of these elements of design and geometry that we observe in the natural world and that we replicate in the way that we live our lives as humans, because we, newsflash, are nature as well. So women being custodians of seed replicates the role that women also play in community as nurturers, as carers, as well as mothers. And you can be biological mother or not. It's not about the biology, it's more about the function and the role that you play in nurturing family, in nurturing community, in nurturing gardens, in nurturing plants, in nurturing trees, in nurturing animals, but also fundamentally in nurturing humans, in nurturing society, in nurturing culture. And so women as the seed, as the bearers of seed within their body, are also the custodians of seed where it appears in the plant world, let me say. The threats to seed are many at the moment. Besides pharmaceutical biopiracy, there's also the threats to seed in the form of agribusiness companies, manufacturers of seeds, who in their attempts to replace the seed cultures of the African continent and the seed knowledge of African women in particular, are threatening the diversity of our seed pool. So how does this actually happen? How do you threaten the diversity of the seed pool? The seeds that are created in a lab are known as hybrid seeds, and usually they are created, they are manufactured to have certain characteristics. So a maize seed, for example, might be programmed or structured, manufactured, created in order to produce tall, sturdy plants, or in order to produce a lot of grains within one cob of maize. Or might be, if you're getting into genetically modified organisms, GMOs, might be manufactured such that it repels certain insects that are considered pests. The thing with hybrid seeds is that these characteristics do not carry over in the second generation of plants. So hybrid seeds are usable once. When you replant, this characteristic that it was manufactured for goes into decline. So if, for example, it was a seed that was supposed to produce a lot of food, the first time you plant it, you get a huge harvest. If you replant the seed that you get from that harvest, then you will get a really poor harvest. And there's other issues with these seeds as well. For example, they draw a lot of nutrients from the soil without really putting it back in, and so you see your soil as a farmer, after a couple of seasons of planting hybrid seeds, will diminish in fertility. And so often the hybrid seeds require the seed fertilizer to go along with it, and the seed fertilizer is nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, which only provides these macronutrients and makes the plant grow quickly, makes the plant grow faster. But again, do not feed the soil. And so what is seed in an African indigenous context? It's the source of life. But what is life in this understanding? It's not just life in the sense of the seed gives me food so I eat and then I'm alive. It's the seed also feeds the soil. The seed feeds the family, feeds the people, feeds society. The seed also feeds, birds and other animal life. The seed in this way is the essence, the beginning, the source of all that maintains life within a group. And then when you get to particular communities, the seed is also the path of sacredness. It's also the path of spirituality. So seed is not just the function, the immediate function, like I say, of, oh, the seed gives me food, therefore I eat, therefore I stay alive. It's also nourishing your spirit. And this comes through in this book, The Seed Thief, which I think is one of the most intriguing aspects of the book. So if you'd like to pick it up for that, definitely recommend. Maddy is looking for these seeds, Neoboldia mundi, in a terreiro, which is a community of candomblé practitioners. Candomblé is a spirituality, a life way that exists in Brazil and was created in Brazil from the syncretization, from the amalgamation of spiritualities coming from the continent of Africa, and in particular drawing from Yoruba Ifa. For example, the existence of deities who are known as orishas, and orishas exist in Yoruba Ifa. They also exist in other spiritualities practiced across South America and in the Caribbean. So the seed that Maddy is looking for is guarded, what the blurb makes reference to, a sect that's wary of outsiders, is a candomblé terreiro. And the terreiro is the temple or the worship space of candomblé practitioners. And the spirituality of candomblé, much like the spirituality of Yoruba Ifa, involves the body. And so this is also an invitation to understand seed as a body, and plants that come out of seeds as bodies that are agential, that actually do things in the world. And the people the candomblé practitioners, part of the spirituality is to work with. So the issue with patenting is that you declare certain practice, or in this case the seed, as proprietary, as belonging to whoever has taken out the patent on it. And what that means is that only they can benefit from it, can profit from it, and if anyone else seeks to benefit or use this seed, then they may be liable to be sued. And so of course that's not cool. So seed co is presented as the bad guys. They're using all different sorts of ways to find the seed, Nuboldia mundi. And then the candomblé practitioners, on the other hand, are presented as like these people who are wanting to jealously guard their knowledge, their seeds, which they have an absolute right to, because they've been cultivating these practices, cultivating these plants, building a relationship with these plants over generations. And so that gets into another aspect of seed in indigenous African practices, which is seed is relationship. Seed is the relationship between people and plants. Seed is a relationship between divinities or rishas and people's human spirits. Seed is a relationship between plants and the soil and all the microorganisms that exist in the soil. So seed is also relationship, and it shows all of these aspects, all of these connections between people, place, plants, microorganisms, spirit, all of life. Another interesting tension and middle ground that's presented in the book is around the question of who can be a purveyor or a transporter of seed. Now, as you get into the book, towards the end, there's a question of, once Maddy gets these seeds, if she can, which you must read the book to find out if she actually does, how will she transport these seeds? And what does she want to do with these seeds? So she finds herself in a middle space of her boss is actually having nefarious intentions and, you know, has thrown her kind of to the wild as a person to find this seed, but is being also funded by Seed Co. There's a Seed Co people as well who are looking for this seed. And then there's the space of the botanical garden, the Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens in Cape Town. And then there's a fourth space of the Kew Botanical Gardens in the UK. And this is a huge seed bank. And so after reading the book, I went and checked out the website of the Kew Botanical Gardens. And one of the things that rubbed me the wrong way was the constant description of the collecting of these seeds and of these specimens of plants as discoveries. That has too many colonial undertones, overtones, just plain tones for me. It's like, oh, these adventurous explorers, white, UK, British, possibly scientists from other places as well, going out to find these seeds and then describing it as discovery of this plant, discovery of that plant, discovery of this species, discovery of this. I'm like, what about the people who lived there? What about the people who have been using these plants? And sometimes the plants are not necessarily, you know, in use at that moment, but like, how do you just rock up somewhere and be like, yes, I discovered this, and chalk it up to your own, you know, of course, your money, your prestige. Anyway, so Maddy in the book wants to get these seeds and send them to this botanical garden, and to her, this is where these seeds will be protected. But like, as I said, seed is relationship. And so when seeds are kept in these ice, you know, vaults or these temperature controlled rooms, and then, you know, periodically taken out every so often, every number of years, and planted just to make sure that they're still alive, and then, okay, get the seeds again and then put them back into this vault, that's not relationship. So already it's working the same way as the patterns work. This is working in another space where it is not maintaining the way of life, the practices that keep the seed alive. Yeah, and this is just as important as the seed is viable, we can plant it, it will grow. Is the seed in conversation with soil? Is the seed in conversation with humans? Is the seed in conversation with the sky, with water? Is the seed in conversation with spirit? So one of the elements of, who transports seed in the seed thief is Maddy and the vaults of the seed banks presented as the safe havens. But at the same time, there's a unanswered question of, well, if the seeds exist there, if the seeds existed in the candomblé terreiro for you to go find, doesn't it mean that they were actually safe there? Doesn't it mean that these people practicing this spirituality of centuries, being in relationship with these seeds, that they've actually been keeping the seed safe, and in the end there's nothing for you to save? That's the other thing that annoys me, the saving. But anyway, maybe that's why the book is called The Seed Thief as opposed to The Seed Savior, which, if it had been called The Seed Savior, Lord help us. One of the things that's not talked about, or it's talked about a bit in the book, but I'm going to bring in another dimension of it, is the Africans who actually brought these seeds over. So yes, Newboldia mundi is a fictional plant seed, but Newboldia levis, as well as a huge range of other African plants and animals, were taken from the continent of Africa to South America, the Caribbean, where Africans were enslaved. And the ways in which these Africans transported these plants, these seeds, these animals. In the book, one of the characters, Zé, who is mentioned in the blurb, who keeps the garden of the terreiro, he is a descendant of both a curandera, a medicine woman, and a man who used to transport botanical goods across the Atlantic from West Africa to Brazil. And in this way, the materia medica, the botanical legacy, the medicinal practices were able to also stay alive. That's one of the ways in which seeds came across from the continent of Africa to South America, the Caribbean. Another way is on the bodies of Africans who so valued their plants, who so valued the relationships that they had with these plants, who so believed in a future to come that they braided seeds into their hair. So they braided African rice, for example, into their hair in order to ensure that they could continue with their life practices wherever it was they were being taken, whether or not they were going to survive, and they could not know that beforehand. So this tension, this question, this unanswered question of who should be doing the transporting of seeds? Who should be doing the movement of seeds, and for what purpose? So again, setting up this question that I've mentioned of, are we doing this to maintain, sustain, add life, prevent death, or are we doing it to make profit for a few people who get really rich? Or are we doing it so that certain people will get props, certain people will get accolades, will have certain plants named after them, which is a practice that still continues? And yes, people from the Kew Botanical Gardens do this. Like, that plant came from Africa. Why are you giving it that name? Please go ask for a local name if at all you were looking for a name. Yeah, so in conclusion, my review of this book is like, it's called The Seed Thief, but actually there's like a whole range of thieves in the book. There's a whole range of thieves and wannabe thieves. And there's a chain of, there's Maddy, yes, she's a seed thief for sure. There's Seed Co, definite seed thieves. There's, this random Texas American who's a seed thief for sure. There's Maddy's boss, who's also a seed thief. He's not doing it himself, but he's manipulating Maddy in all of these ways to get her to do this, because he knows how to get her to do this thing by playing on her, you know, do-gooder self. There's the named but not actually present Kew Botanical Gardens. There's a lover of Zay who, you know, gets the seeds and gives them to Maddy, and sorry if that's a spoiler, and gives them to Maddy just so that she can leave, yeah, to get her out of the way. So all of these thieves of seed form this intriguing chain that ends up fatal, deathly for some people. You have to read the book to find out the details of that, and how that intrigue is just woven through in a really interesting way. But I also find myself asking, you know, how much do we value an African woman's refusal? In the book, the curandera, who is possibly the one who planted the seeds that Maddy is looking for, appears to Maddy in a dream. And in this dream, all she says is no. Like, she just shakes her head no. Then Maddy should not do whatever she's doing. And so in this moment, we're presented with this person who is actually the custodian, the guardian in spirit form, but also while she was alive, she was the person who planted these seeds, tended to these seeds, worked with the medicinal aspects of these seeds. And she's an African woman, and she says no. How much value do we give to an African woman's refusal? I'll leave that there. And yeah, some of my recommended reads coming from this book and expanding some of the themes that arise in this book, and particularly around seed. The article that I give reference to as I talk about Tharaka women and what they taught me. Indigenous women in Kenya rebuild resilience amidst an eco-cultural crisis. And this is published on Open Global Rights. I'll leave a link down below. But it's about how these women, in rematriating seed as well as the ceremonies associated with seed and their roles in these ceremonies and their roles as seed custodians, how doing this work is both restoring their cultural practices as well as restoring the seed, so the ecological practices. And Ancestors knows we need to do that work in this time of climate apocalypse, climate crisis, which I'll talk about this at another point probably, but that apocalypse has been happening for a long time, not just for the past 100 years or 50 years or 2 years since the IPCC, you know, posted the report saying that, oh shit, we're fucked in the next 12 years. Another book that I highly recommend is Bitter Roots, The Search for Healing Plants in Africa by Abena Dove Oseo Asare. And I will post the link also to Bitter Roots in the description box. And Bitter Roots came out of academic research by a scholar researching how medicinal African plants move through all of these networks and webs. And so exploring these different relationships of the scientists who are researching these plants, but also the pharmaceutical companies who have an interest in these plants and their medicinal benefits. And I believe also, you know, how these plants were used by indigenous communities. So Bitter Roots, I'll put that in the description box. And this book that did a whole lot for me to help me understand that the transport of enslaved Africans from the continent of Africa to the Americas was not just a transport of human bodies, it was also a transport of, or a stealing actually, of plants and animals and the knowledge that came with this. So Africans enslaved were not just brute labor. They were not just, you know, the calories in their bodies that were going to do work. In the Shadow of Slavery, Africa's Botanical Legacy in the Atlantic World by Judith Carney and Richard Nicholas Rosomoff. Super awesome book. will really shift how you understand the agency and the intelligence and the amazingness, the dopeness of indigenous Africans and our practices, our life worlds, our ways of making and being with the world. So until next time, I am Wangũi. I'm an African who reads. See you.